And today we are delighted to welcome Sima Ruparelia to the show. Sima, thank you for coming and thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
Would you mind starting by just giving us a brief overview into how you got into the insurance industry and perhaps why insurance in the first place?
Yeah, so when I was finishing university, basically because I did maths, as you've just said, one of the natural careers is going into actuarial. I wanted to keep up with the math side of my learning, so I thought actuarial would be a good place. You know, I did consider the other careers, banking, trading, but everything you heard about banking and trading and back in those days was it wasn't great for women, it was definitely not great for Asian people, and I just thought it's not as humane an industry as insurance seemed to be. So insurance seemed to be much more welcoming, much more balanced in how you could fit in.
What gave you that impression? Because such a young age at 21, 22, coming out of university, what made you feel that way about the industry relative to or compared to banking and sort of other parts of the financial services sector?
It was probably a bit of naivety because... But you heard so much in the press about bankers and their bonuses and their partying and the drugs, to be honest, in those days, and how you had to be ruthless. And you just didn't hear anything like that from the insurance industry. So it was probably less that I'd heard anything about insurance. And it just felt like it was an office job versus banking, where it had all of these stereotypes that went with it.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, looking back to, embarking on your career, did you think then that you'd want to be in a leadership position as you are now at this stage in your career?
No, to be honest, I didn't even think about it. I was just like, I just want to get a job, make sure I earn some money, have some security. Yeah. That was all it was about. I never really thought about where am I going? What are my plans? It was all about getting in, studying. And to be honest, my first couple of years, it was a bit about partying, not about actually like getting my head down and thinking about the next stages. Partly because in my university time, I'd had to go home every weekend to spend time with my mum. So I'd missed out quite a bit on the university life. So once I'd got to a job and was actually living quite close to home, it wasn't so bad. I actually thought, okay, now I can actually take the time to enjoy myself for a bit.
Yeah. And enjoy your early 20s. And was that a networking at that point, or was it more sort of partying with friends outside of the industry?
No, it was more in the industry, actually. So it was just people I worked with. There's, graduate schemes where I worked. So it was really around all the graduates going out together. And
which is quite, because I mean, a lot of the conversations we've had so far is the importance of network and some of those relationships you formed earlier in your career. How has it helped, hold you in good stead later down?
Yeah, definitely. Some of those relationships are some of my best friends now, and also the people I turn to sometimes when I need career advice, because they've all come up. Maybe they're not all in C-suite positions, but they also know the challenges. So it does give you a network of people to talk to.
And when did that, so first few years, sort of fell into insurance a little bit or chose it, not knowing too much about it, only that it was different to sort of banking and other parts of the sector. First few years, just enjoying life more than anything, and hadn't given much consideration to kind of career and what next could look like. When did that, was there a moment in time where that changed and that flipped?
Yeah, so I guess I had difficulty with the actuarial exams at first, and I was really struggling with my mental health at that point in time. So whilst I was partying, I wasn't really looking after myself. And then I realised I needed to take some time off. So I actually took 6 months out and then went back to work. So I think you said I started at Cardiff Pinnacle, but I actually worked at CIS for 2 years before that. That's where I started. And then I took 6 months out. I did a contract in those 6 months just to keep the money coming in, but it wasn't actuarial. And really took time to get my mental health in order.
Okay.
And then that's when my brain triggered that actually I want to get somewhere and I don't want to carry on like this. So when I started at Pinnacle, I was already in that mindset of, right, how do I make this a really good career? Also, I was in a long-term relationship back then, and we'd also broken up in that period, and we'd been together 7 years or something.
Oh, wow.
So it was a really difficult time in that period, and I was like, okay, now I don't have that to focus on. Let me focus on something else. Career helped me focus on not being in that relationship.
Just obviously just on the mental health, because obviously it's a big sort of topic, big theme. It's very current in today's working culture, and I think a lot of people, both from an HR and business perspective, are more aware of mental health, certainly in the industry. I'm just curious how, obviously it's always a difficult time, but how you got yourself out of that frame of mind and the sort of back into the world of work. How did you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, for want of a better phrase?
Yeah, so for me, a lot of what helped me get out of that frame of mind was focusing on work instead of focusing on personal life. So the personal life side was very difficult because of I'd broken up with someone, and my family found it difficult because it was a multi-ethnic relationship, and I'd hidden it for years. So for me, getting away from all of that mess and spending time on myself was really important. So I'd spent quite a bit of time with the doctors and got diagnosed with an underactive thyroid, which then helped me to get better because of the medication, which I have to take today as well. And then spent time in therapy as well. I found a therapist, spent time with her, and really worked on what the drivers of what causes it and techniques to help you overcome it. So there are lots of great techniques out there.
What are some of the ones that have really helped you?
Some of the ones that really helped me there's something called dropping the anchor.
Okay.
So if you having real turmoil and you get rumination and a lot of like thoughts going over and over and over in your head, there's a way to just breathe and what you call drop the anchor. So just sit with the feelings. Don't try and push them away. So if you try and push them away, you're actually making it worse but don't drop the anchor. So you stop the rumination by feeling where it is in your body and then trying to breathe through there. And it's a really great technique, and I can't remember the author of the book now, but it's a great book, and I can always try and send it on so that you can attach it to the link later.
Yes, please.
That would be good.
He's a great Australian mental health writer.
Okay. Were you struggling with the actuarial exams because of the mental health, or because the actuarial exams were just so difficult and impossible?
No, because of the mental health. So it was really hard to concentrate on studying instead of everything else that was going on.
Okay.
So once I restarted work, then I was not struggling so much because I was so focused by that point. So that switch had happened.
And were you then, when you sort of came back into work after that period of your life, at that point where you sort of focused on, right, how can I get as high as I possibly can within this organisation, or were you just glad to be back in?
I was glad to be back in, and I was focused on getting my exams and just doing a really good job. I wasn't focused on where's this going to take me. It was more, I just want to do a good job. I want to get on with people. I want to learn. So that's the focus mode I was in. So it wasn't really about seniority at that point in time. I was still sort of going through the learning phases.
And in terms of fast forwarding to today and the leader that you are, I mean, what characteristics or personality traits do you think have really helped you be the leader that you are today?
So I think determination is a really big one. At some point in that journey, I did flip to being very strategic about where I wanted to go next. And that's probably more how you've known me rather than in the past. Then
just on that, was there any particular period of time, because I know Solvency II was obviously a big piece of regulation that perhaps arguably elevated the role of the actuary and the CRO. Was there anything either internally or externally that made you think, right, I'm going to go to the C-suite, or was it just a natural, organic journey, growth?
So after I went to EY, and then really I was thinking about partnership. I was like, I can do that. Yeah. So when you see people doing it, and I didn't have a role model as an Asian woman, but I saw people that I thought, oh, they're going out to sell. I can do that.
Yeah.
I'm a different actuary. I can speak. I've got communication skills.
Yeah.
I was quite different to a lot of the team there. And I was like, okay, so I'll head for partnership. And that's when my ambition really started along those lines. But then over time, as you see clients and you see the C-suite, and then you're like, okay, but do I want this or do I want that? So I really spent some time thinking about, do I want partnership or do I want to move into the company? And at the time, I felt that I needed to move into company to see what it was like at the senior levels, and then I could make an informed decision, because you can always go back to partnership, but it's hard to jump the other way later on in your career.
And you mentioned role models. What have been the importance of role models in your sort of early career, later career, or lack of role models? How have you overcome some of those barriers and sort of challenges?
Yeah, so I think it is easier if you've got role models, but yeah, I didn't really have role models per se, but I did have very supportive bosses, managers, people who were able to support me on my journey, and that was really important to me. So I wasn't very good at network outside of my bosses at that point in time, but the ones I had were very supportive of career growth and where do you want to go and where do you want to be. So I think a lot of my leadership style, and I think that was one of your questions, comes from seeing those things. It's really important to me, and one of the things that I get most gratification from is seeing people develop and going up the ladder themselves. It's really nice when you see just the progress. So at my 50th birthday party just recently, shouldn't say my age, but anyway, I was sat next to, I'd arranged a sit down, proper full-on black tie dinner, and I was sat next to one of my bosses and one of the guys who worked for me as well, who now works for this boss as their group chief actuary. So it's just really nice to see the progression of him, right? He's now their group chief actuary, and I feel like I had a part to play in that. So,
and on that question, on the leadership traits, you mentioned determination. Any other kind of key characteristics?
Yeah, resilience, because not everything's going to go your way. And there were definitely times where things did not go my way. And some of it is down to prejudice. And you knew it was down to prejudice, but you couldn't do anything about it. So you can either sit and think about how unfair that is, or think about, okay, I'm going to show you, which is always, I guess, been one of my attitudes of, if someone thinks I can't do something, I'm going to show them I can. And I think that a lot of that is the resilient side of it. Not that I don't ever feel upset or down, but you just bounce back, and you have to learn to bounce back. So that would be another one. I think the other, in terms of leadership style, is I'm actually quite empathetic as well. In terms of working with people, I really care about them as people, including if they're going through things themselves. That's not to say that I'm a soft touch. So you have to balance between, making sure people are delivering, but also having that empathy and caringness. And so that, for me, is, I guess, one of the traits of my leadership style, to make sure I'm doing both of those things.
And, determination and resilience, are they innate, or are they sort of learned behaviors? And if learned, or where do you think they came from? Was it something developed from a young age, or?
Yeah, I think a lot of how I am is shaped from a very young age. I think a lot of what you go through really pushes you into where you are, and that's been part of the drive for me as well, that whole childhood. What
were some of those values that were formed in those kind of early childhood days that have shaped the person and leader that you ultimately are today?
I grew up in quite originally a patriarchal society, because that's what we were like. My parents had an arranged marriage. They'd come from Uganda and moved to the UK in 1970. So they had, were still just settling into the country when I was born 5 years later. And we came from a big family on my dad's side and my mum's side, actually. And my dad was not the oldest, but was the one who looked after everyone. So he literally looked after everyone. So when all his cousins came over, they all lived in one big house in Chiswick with us. People were living in bathrooms. And I remember going through his papers and seeing a letter from the council saying, you've got too many people living in this house, because there was probably about 30 people living in this 4-bedroomed house. But he didn't want them to go to refugee camps, so he had everyone living in our house. He basically gave them all money to set them up in businesses around the country, and really set everyone up. So when we were living in Stoke, which is where we moved to, he had his own ice cream factory by this point. So we had an ice cream factory. It was an amazing experience as well.
As a child,
well,
free ice cream.
From a child, right? I worked from the age of 4 in that factory, so it wasn't like we were, and okay, I wasn't doing heavy lifting or anything. I was putting the chewing gum in the bottom of those, the ones with the chewing gum and then the ice cream on top. That was my job. An easy job for a 4-year-old. But, we were all there working together. So that gave me that part of that work ethic part. And then he died when I was 5.
Gosh.
And I have 2 older sisters and a mum. And my mum at the time, again, patriarchal society, she didn't know how to drive. She didn't know how to pay the bills. She always went to work with him, but she didn't know how to run the business. So essentially, she was having a hard time with dealing with all of that. And so from that point on, I didn't really feel like I had a parent to some extent. She looked after the basic needs, but not the emotional needs. And I don't mean to be harsh to her, because I love her to pieces and she's a great woman, and we wouldn't be where I am today without her. But it was a struggle for her, right? Because she had so much to pick up on, and she had 3 youngish kids. My older sister's 10 years older, so she was 15 at the time.
And were you the youngest?
I was the youngest, yeah. So at that point, the wider family essentially didn't visit so much, because they were visiting for my dad more than anything else. So we kind of felt a bit abandoned as well. And I guess this is where a lot of my mental health things came from, that abandonment. At the age of 5, you don't understand that your father's died, that you just think he's abandoned you. And in those days, now you get a lot of therapy, child counselling for grief and things, but there was nothing like that then. So you were kind of just left on your own. On top of that, I was also the family would say to my mum, you can't bring up 3 girls, or, girls are not going to get anywhere. And my mum used to say, I wish I'd had 3 boys, because who's going to look after me when I'm older? Because again, in our culture, the girls don't look after their parents. They get married and they look after their husband's parents. So there was a lot of that feeling that you're not good enough. And so I was always rebelling against that feeling, and I was always rebelling. I think that's what's innate in me, that rebellious side. Always rebelling against, like, people telling me I can't do something, or people telling me that we have to behave in a certain way. So I'd always rebel in the family, saying, well, I can do anything that guy can do, or that was always the way I was. And I learned from a young age to stand up for myself, because I had to. From a very young age, I was kind of negotiating. I remember when I was 11, we had the windows changed, and my mum speaks English, but it's still not the greatest thing. And I was there talking to the window guy and going, no, we're not paying that. We're going to pay this. And negotiating at such a young age. And I always had the confidence, I guess, to do that and start. And I guess that's from having all of that responsibility from quite that age. And then, the friendships at school and everything were hard, because Stoke-on-Trent wasn't the most inclusive of environments, and me and my sister were pretty much the only ethnic minorities in the school. And so I particularly had a lot of exclusion at certain points in time, where parents didn't want them to socialise with someone that was Indian.
Wow.
There was a lot of blatant exclusion. Even with friends' families, when I went to them and I was friends, they'd say a lot of racist stuff in front of me. And then my friend would go, but Sima, she's here, what are you doing? And they say, oh, she's one of us, because I acted English. So all of these things really gave me that resilience and determination to sort of make something of myself. I didn't want anyone saying that girls couldn't do anything, and I didn't want anyone saying I couldn't do anything.
And because sometimes it's interesting in families how siblings react to environments and not necessarily, can react quite differently. Have they gone down similar kind of corporate routes, or have they done all of three quite different things?
Both of my older siblings worked in the NHS, actually. One works in the NHS still. One is a housewife and mum now. But my older sisters are really, like, when you talk about role models or people that are inspirational, she is inspirational. Like, she was 15 when my dad died. She helped to bring us up a large part of our childhood. She went to uni at home because she couldn't leave home because we were so little. But she went and did a physics degree. She used her grant at the time to help pay the household expenses because there's a period of time where we had no money because we had another difficult phase where my mum's business partner stole some of the business off of us and decided not to pay us one day, and actually couldn't get any help from the government from then because you'd had a business, so you couldn't go and say I'm signing on or anything. So we literally had no income coming in, so we had quite a few weeks where we were struggling even to just buy food. And then my sister would help with her grant, or like my mum tried to then go and work for one of my uncles who ran a shop, and they helped us out a bit. But it was a really difficult time. Again, giving me that thing that I never wanted to rely on anyone, and I never wanted help from anyone, and I was just going to do everything myself, and I was going to be able to look after everyone myself. That's been part of my journey completely. But she, went to uni, and then she got her first job in London, and came home every weekend herself because she couldn't leave us. She lived with my aunt and uncle, and just really looked after us. Again, supported me and my other sister through university.
Wow.
Not monetary wise, but just making sure we got there. She's just an amazing role model even today.
And because you mentioned actually in terms of sometimes in the workplace, if you've faced, underlying prejudice, or you've not sort of sat there and thought this isn't fair, you've thought actually I'm going to prove them wrong. Are you a natural kind of optimist or quite positive thinker, or is that something you have to kind of mindfully work towards, not letting things like this get you down and actually you fight back?
I think actually I'm quite negative. So I usually start off quite negative, but it doesn't last that long. So maybe there is always something that brings me back to hope and that resilient side.
It's almost fuel to keep you going.
Yeah, exactly. So at first, I don't necessarily think, it's unfair, but I do think,
here we
what
go.
now? I've got to work. Like, now what am I going to do? How am I going to get over this? And then eventually I'll come around to actually, this is okay. I can manage anything. Let me get on. Being brutally honest.
Yeah.
And what about failure? You've mentioned not sort of quite the word failure, but many times where things haven't gone your way, or you've had to sort of change tack. What would you say has been your biggest failure as a leader, and what did you learn from it, or what have you learned from it, or are you still learning from it?
I would say that the hardest time I had was at EY, and I felt like a bit of a failure there because it took me a while to get to my senior manager promotion. And it was because I always found it hard to separate people from the work, so the emotional side from the work. So I would always struggle with my friendships versus people I work with, and then like, how do I give someone bad feedback because they're my friend, or stuff like that. So I found that really difficult, and that meant that I wasn't dealing with that side well enough. And so again, at first I was like, well, they're not being very fair because I've sold all this business to RSA and no one else at my level's ever done that, and I've done this and I've done that. And I think that's true. I think it was unfair, but I also realized I had something to develop in myself. So, I spent the next 6 months working on myself, as well as working on continuing to prove myself, right? At first I was like, I'm just going to leave. And then I was like, actually, no, I'm not going to leave because I don't like leaving anywhere when I haven't shown I'm really good. So I was like, I'm going to show I'm really good. Then I'm going to leave.
Yeah. Do you think it's quite a provocative question, but Do you think if you'd been a man in that situation, that had nobody else at your level had sold it to RSA or achieved what you'd achieved, but had things to develop on the emotional side of leadership management, do you think, I don't know what period of time we're going back to, but do you think if you had been a man, that wouldn't have been as big an issue?
I don't think it would have been an issue at all, to be honest, because I saw it all around me. And it wasn't just men, it was white women as well who got favoured. Yeah. I saw it around me where someone who wasn't doing as well as me was basically getting promoted and I wasn't.
And when was this? What year roughly?
Around 2008, 2009.
Yeah, so not that long ago.
No, not really that long ago. But don't get me wrong, I loved it there.
Yeah.
And once I got over that period, I really loved it there. And I don't know, somehow I managed to prove myself and managed to get over that hump.
Do you still see that happening today, or have we moved on as a society, as an industry?
I think we've moved on, definitely. I think there's more awareness. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because I think it does happen, but I think that it's less prevalent and more thoughtful about what people are doing.
You mentioned there, if I understood correctly, sort of learning to, if you've been promoted, giving feedback to people that, had been friends. And it's actually, I think that's for maybe some of our listeners who are recently promoted into a leadership position, and suddenly they're now managing their peers. And I think that is quite a common theme of being quite a hard transition to make, because you've been used to maybe catching up with them over a drink and talking as peers. Suddenly you're the ones setting their, strategy for the year or goals. Or what would you advise people in that position who are newly into a role and having to make that transition from peer to manager?
So I think you can be friends with people who are below you, but you've got to set your boundaries up front. So for me, that's what I basically ended up doing, setting my boundaries and saying, look, this is what I expect from you. We can carry on socializing and stuff, and I really want to, but I've got to deal with this work side as well. So if you're not delivering, I will tell you, and have those really honest conversations. That's how I went about it.
Just good communication.
After failing on it, right? After making some mistakes on it.
It's hard. I do think it is hard. Because especially in this industry, when relationships are so important, and it's one of the strengths of this industry. But yeah. And
then, once I'd moved on from the firm that I was doing that in, and I moved to a different firm, I was more careful, I suppose, at that point about who I made friends with and who I thought could have a friendship and take the feedback versus who could not. And I learned that over time. So I then you do end up having less friends as you get older in terms of people in the companies and departments.
Yeah.
As you go up the ladder, it's something you have to accept. And I think that's why people say it's lonely at the top, because you do have to rely on yourself a lot.
So, Sima, obviously the market's evolving and adapting very, very quickly, even as we sort of sit here today. What do you think are some of the challenges that insurance leaders are going to be facing over the next 5 years, and what skills will they need to either upskill or develop from scratch completely?
Yeah, so obviously the P&C market is likely to go through more of a soft cycle. Some of the lines of business are still hard, but they're likely to start softening and already have to some extent. I think managing a soft cycle is much harder, obviously, than managing the hard cycle. And I think the best leaders will be the ones that are inclusive of different thoughts and ideas. The ones that I think won't do so well are the ones that are still, I'm just going to listen to my underwriters and that's all I'm going to do. I think if you get a breadth of experience, and as you know, I'm very interested in strategy and I spend a lot of time on how do we strategically make the business better. I think that's what you need. Whatever role you're in a C-suite, that's the attitude you should have. And the leaders that the CEOs that bring you along that journey with you, no matter what role you're in, and appreciate that attitude, I think, are the ones that are going to succeed the most.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one of the challenges. I think the other challenges are obviously around AI. So there's going to be a fight to reduce expenses with people who can deliver on AI and reduce expenses quicker. I think there's going to be a difficulty about where to use it, and the insurance industry isn't always known at being forward thinking. So I think having people with vision and that forward thinking ambition is really quite important. And, you know, I see various levels of that, right, where people are like, I just want to turn the handle, keep the business going. I'm not thinking in a forward way. In various places, people I've talked to, and then other people that are really ambitious. So for me, I think the ambitious ones are going to win.
We're starting to see it as well. It's not so much a trend right now, but there's certainly pockets of examples where people from an actuarial, mathematical, risk management background are moving into that underwriting role and that sort of leadership role where it is becoming more about the data rather than the intuition and the human judgment. So I think you're 100% right there. And what advice would you give someone, what advice would you give someone who's entering the market with aspirations to, you know, run a company one day, or at the very least reach the board? I suppose another way of framing that question is if you can look back at your 21, 22-year-old self just entering the market for the first time, what advice would you give young, aspiring future leaders?
I mean, obviously there's the obvious ones: work hard, put your head down, get on with things. I think people in the younger generation at the moment, and I hate to generalize, sometimes find that hard because they're always looking for the next thing. Like, I've done that now, what can I do next? I guess it's down to the fact that everything's so at our fingertips these days. So that's what they're used to. So I think they need a bit of patience. And I think that really pays off in thinking about your future. And also, don't just jump for whatever opportunity just because it's giving you more money or a slight step up. Really think about, is this the right next step? I see it time and time again at the moment. People are like, well, I just want the next step. It doesn't matter. I just want to go up. They'll jump department or jump, and I'll be like, yeah, but that's only going to get you so far. So are you thinking longer term? Like, don't worry about the fact that you might earn something for 2 to 3 years that's slightly higher, when really what you're looking for is in 5 years' time to be in the C-suite, or 10 years' time to be in the C-suite, right? Like, what's the best journey for that, even if it means I have to not get paid as much for a couple of years? So I think people balance short term against long term too much of the short term. And I'm just like, just think about the long term, think about what the right strategic steps are.
I totally agree. It's all about thinking, what's your next role after your next role?
Exactly.
That's the advice I always give sort of candidates that we're looking to place. You know, what is this a stepping stone, or can it be a foundation, a platform to, you know, becoming a CUO or a CRO or a chief actuary? Totally agree.
And Sima, our final question that we ask our guests is, what is your go-to song if you are needing a motivational boost, or you've got a big board meeting in the day and you want to give yourself that extra bit of zuzz, if that's such a thing? What's your go-to?
So I love Jess Glynn and Clean Bandit, Nowhere I'd Rather Be.
Okay. That's a good one. Yeah.
Because it's very upbeat, and also it puts you in the frame of mind that this is where I want to be, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm going to do. So it's a positive frame of mind. Yeah. And I love it in all occasions, right? When I'm with friends, when I'm with family, when I'm in work. I really it's a very positive song.
And encourages you to be really present.
It does. And that's a really important part of not just work, but managing your mental health. Being present is such a big part of it.
Yeah. Oh, well, Sima, absolute pleasure to have you on this, and thank you for that and being so generous with what you've shared.
Thank you.